For us, the first issue that we began with was hunger, because in the 1980s, we lost many of our factories and industries, as was true in most countries in North America and Europe. And people who before had made a comfortable income were now on a very low income. And as a result, we had, for the first time in the history of the city, hunger. And that was the beginning issue. It was hunger as a health issue and a poverty issue. But in the period when I was involved, we moved it beyond hunger to deal with the whole of the food system. And that includes environment, what's the impact of food on food and food production on the safety of the environment. We did about bringing people together in society, because more and more we live in an anonymous society, and it is one of my big worries that has a huge impact on mental health, not just physical health. So we began to talk about how gardens can bring people together, how farmers markets can bring people together. And so I would say we made the transition from dealing with one issue, a very important issue still, hunger, to dealing with social well-being, mental health, as well as physical health, and the environment in general. That's really the story of the Toronto Food Policy Council. The interesting challenge for food is, the saying in English is, someone is always the bridegroom, but never the bride. You are not the first choice. If you ask, what's the most important thing for health? It won't be food. It will be genetics and doctors. And then third will be food. If you ask, what's the number one place for jobs? You would say, well, first in jobs is education, and then down is food. And so wherever you look, it's never the number one issue, but it's always number two or number three. And so therefore, the biggest problem with food is to get attention. That look down two issues, not only at the first, but the second and third, and see that it goes right across. Unlike other issues, it goes right across. And so the biggest challenge for food is to get attention. In a hierarchy, which is going up and down, you can't get attention of a horizontal line. And so, and I would say, in English, the expression is you are pushing uphill. To get recognized, you are pushing uphill. Once they see you as an issue, it is downhill. You're pushing downhill. So that has been the biggest challenge, is to say to planners, you can't plan well unless you plan for food. To say to traffic people, you can't work on traffic unless you understand food. To say to waste, you can't deal with waste unless you deal with food. That's the big challenge. The interesting one of the interesting things about today's world is that people are becoming more and more local, because the world has become more and more global, but it is so in a very anonymous way, and in a way an alienating way. And so people are starting to rediscover what is so wonderful about Rome, or what is so wonderful about Toronto. And so the globalized world has made people very local in their passions. But at the same time, we are in a global world, and I am local in a very global way. And in English, we have developed the term glocal. So, for example, my daughter works with people who are bringing Mexican cuisine to Toronto. But because many of the things that are central to Mexican food you can grow in Toronto: corn, beans, so our idea, we think what Toronto can contribute, and I think Rome can also contribute, is to a global food scene, which is, after all the foods that you eat in Italy, very many of them have come from somewhere else. The tomato comes from Mexico. The potato for gnocchi comes from Peru. like most cultures in the world, all our foods are global foods, and likewise our understanding must be global. And I have learned very much from being here in Italy just for 3 days, and I think other people from Italy could learn from being 3 days in Toronto as well. So we are an international movement and not just a local, narrow movement. You know that people organized in many areas in society before we began to talk about food. The food movement is a very young movement. It's only 20 years old. The women's movement maybe is 50 years old. The labor movement is 200 years old. And so food is a very young movement. And I think one reason why it is very late is that it is more complex than gender issues or than class issues. And one of the things that is more complex is that it is an issue for everyone, because whether you're male or female, white or black, Italian or English, rich or poor, we all eat. We all have to eat. And there are issues that we all have in common. And at the same time, we have issues of conflict. So I think that food is more difficult than most issues because it requires cooperation, but it also requires conflict. And so I would say, who do we have as opposition is actually a very small group, and they refer to it as being the 1%. But those people who understand economics know it is not 1%, it's 0.01%. To my mind, there is no enemy. It's just 0.01% that controls the top 500 global corporations and the rules that are set for them. So for me, the opportunity for food and the challenge is to build coalitions that cross all our normal lines. We want men and women, we want rich and poor, we want workers and teachers and professors and business people. The challenge is to find ways that enemies and friends can work together.